So we did these studies, and I'll give you the summary of it, and then we'll go into the details. But the summary is, my dean at the time, after I wrote up the first study and got it published in Behavioral Sciences and the Law, and I gave it to him to read. This is a different dean now. We had an interim dean, and then, we've had different dean sequences. But I gave it to my dean at the time and said, here's what I learned about law students working with a good psychologist, because he knew what my theories were. And after he read it, he came back to the office and he said, I feel like the doctor talking to the other doctor with mixed emotions saying, congratulations, you were right, the patient is dead. And I thought, wow, I guess those are the feelings that I'm having. It's nice to have caught on to something, but it was a tough thing to see. As much positivity as there is about the legal profession, as much as I enjoyed it, and I would love to go back now. I just gave a talk yesterday to a professional responsibility class, and I was telling them honestly, do not get depressed by this stuff. I was a lawyer for 11 years, loved it, and I would love to go back now. I'd love it even more now that I know all this stuff. So you're getting it up here front-loaded. You don't have to have any of these problems, none of them. There's no reason for it once you understand their cause, because the cause is purely a matter of choice. And when I give this talk to law students, it's an hour talk, or lawyers. It's a tougher talk to lawyers because they're kind of locked into their lifestyle, and it's a harder change to make than changing your attitude for law students and saying, well, maybe I'll focus on that value instead of this one. It's a little easier when the sprout is coming up out of the soil than when you've got an oak tree there and you're saying, good, but the direction to grow would have been just a little bit more over this way. Can you push it over? It's a little easier with that delicate sprout, the new student or even the second or third year student, than it is for the fully blossomed tree. But people can do it. You start turning this side to the sun a little more and you say, yeah, this side isn't working. I'll trust my instinct. Looks like the research is telling me the same thing. So, it's worthwhile everywhere, but it's easier. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Let's face it. The details of the study went something like this. When law students, and we compared our law students at two different schools, very diverse law schools, to a large sample of undergraduate students who were not pre-law. Hundreds of them, who took most of the same studies within the last year or so, and we just compared. The first piece, which is really good news, is that I'm going to have good news, bad news, good news. Okay? The good news was the law students looked great when they came in. They looked great. Healthier psychologically than the upper class undergraduates, which pretty much blows out that idea that these people are self-selecting because they're already depressed mood, anxious, they want more of it, and they don't care to have any meaning and purpose in their life, they just want money. That went out the window with that study. We've replicated it several times, same thing. It's amazing the different samples of law students that we look at incoming into different schools. They look remarkably the same. There are some differences, age, things like that, but their psychological markers are wonderful. Their values are good, quite idealistic. Their motivation is good. They're coming for the right reasons psychologically. They want to do something that matters. They think they'll enjoy the work. Their needs are very well met. Their psychological needs. These are not depressed people. They're fine, and fine and above. On average. There's a range, of course, like in any sample. So that's the good news. The bad news was pretty much everything that happens in law school. And I'll just say as a caveat here, because we don't want to be too hard on law schools, it's good to know what's happening in your house. It may be happening in all the rest of the houses down the street, too. We don't know that this isn't happening in other kinds of graduate professional programs. We don't know that. We know it's not happening in undergraduate because we measured undergraduate students toward the end, and they were fine also. And we've tried to get samples. I keep trying. Let's get medical schools. Let's get nursing schools. Let's get, business schools to study. It's very, very hard to do these studies, and so far nobody's been willing to come forth from the other schools and say, okay, yeah, we'll take it on, because it's hard to get the data. It's a lot of data. But we'll keep trying. Meanwhile, I think it doesn't matter. It would be interesting to know, but all I'm saying is we don't necessarily need to single out law schools, but if it's happening in my house, who cares if it's happening down the street in the neighbor's house too? If it's happening in my house, let's take care of my house. I can do something about that. I can't do something about the neighbors. So, but that's a little sidestep because we don't want to be too hard on law schools. But let's find out what's actually going on with our students, because they are going to be the lawyers of the United States of America very soon. And they're going to be dealing with the clients of the United States of America very soon. And so let's deal with that to the extent we can. So the bad news was all the measures that we took went in the wrong direction, every single one of them. To the extent that my psychology buddy, Ken Sheldon, he was amazed. As a matter of fact, when we structured this study, I said, well, I want to study values. He said, well, there's pretty much no sense studying values because they don't change. I said, okay, well, can we study it anyway? And we'll just confirm that they don't change, because I think they do change. I think that's the problem. And it's going to relate to this self-esteem thing. But I think that's definitely a problem now that I've read the studies he sent me. He said, sure, we'll study it. They did change. That was number one. They went from healthy values, on average, and these are small changes in raw numbers, in actual shifts, but they're very large changes in statistical significance because they're so stable, people's values, that there's very little deviation in them. So when there's a persistent deviation in a direction, it's hugely significant, and that's what we got. The values went from healthier to unhealthier values on average. The motivation, same thing. The level of well-being, which we sort of combined as a measure of the standard measures of depression, and then positive and negative mood affect, it's called, which is a very well-established measure now. And life satisfaction, all well-established measures in positive psychology. We measured all that, combined it all together, and the shifts were striking, really striking, from the beginning of the first year to 2/3 of the way through the first year. Benjamin and his group way back found the same thing, that it happened in the first 4 months in their study. And then students did not rebound, it continued to get worse, all the way through the 3 years of law school. That was his early studies in the 80s. In ours, it did happen. We didn't do it every 4 months because we had a much bigger set of measures to take, but we did it first day of orientation, and then, sufficiently before finals in the second semester that they weren't worried about finals yet. I mean, we could have done a lot of things to skew these numbers, like take them right when a big, draft was due for legal writing, or right before exams, or right after grades came out in first semester. We could have gotten really bad numbers if we'd wanted to. But we were careful to take the sampling in the most neutral period we could in the second semester, when they could have readjusted to their first grades, which are always lower than they expect, not getting worried about finals yet in a break period. And it was bad, really bad. On those numbers, even the raw numbers were big. It was almost an entire interval